Hi, I'm Diane Macedo. Today on ABC News Live, for the first time in more than a decade, Arizona has flipped. Democrat Katie Hobbs is projected to win the governor's race, beating Trump-packed Kari Lake. This as Republicans are closing in on a majority in the House. The fallout after Mike Pence's exclusive interview with David Muir. The former vice president is breaking his silence about the January 6th insurrection, calling former President Trump reckless. Now Trump is expected to announce he's running for president for a third time. Will his former VP challenge him? And a potential solution to global warming. Our Maggie Rulli travels to the Scottish Highlands to show us why peat is now the hottest ticket for climate investors. But we begin with the latest on the midterm elections. Republicans are closing in on control of the House after winning more key seats overnight. Meanwhile, ABC News can project Democrat Katie Hobbs is the winner of the Arizona governor's race, beating Republican Kari Lake, who had Trump's endorsement. ABC News political director Rick Klein joins me live now, along with ABC's Jay O'Brien on Capitol Hill for more. Rick, Kari Lake is already signaling she's not going to concede. What happens if she doesn't, and how significant is this win for Democrats?
Well, she has so far said that Arizonans know BS when they see it. Strong suggestion that she's not giving in. Although we haven't quite seen some of the inflammatory language out of her or many of the other MAGA supporting election deniers who have lost their races. They seem more fired up about Trump's loss than about their own losses. She's entitled to any legal remedies. Our projection doesn't have the force of law, quite obviously, and all the votes will be counted. But once those are exhausted, it's hard to imagine there being a future path. And I'll tell you, this is as big a win as Democrats feel like they got anywhere on the map. As big as flipping the Senate was, the idea that they held the governorship in a range of battleground states in the upper Midwest, and now winning in Arizona against one of the real rising stars of the Trump-aligned MAGA movement, someone that had been talked about, a potential candidate for national office in Kari Lake. That is a big win, both in the substance as well as the symbolism for Democrats.
Now, Jay, Republicans are close to that number of 218 seats they need to win a majority. So what key races are you still keeping your eye on?
Yeah, they're within striking distance of that majority, right? They're just a few seats away. There are still some very close races in California and Colorado. Some of them are just a few hundred to a few thousand votes away. However, the sense you get from Republicans here on Capitol Hill is that they are very much preparing to be in the majority. They held their first day of leadership meetings yesterday. They'll hold leadership elections later today. Republican members very much expect to be in the majority, but when they get that majority, if they get that majority, it is not going to be the numbers that Republicans wanted. They'll only have it by a few seats, and it's certainly, as you've been hearing for days and almost a week now, it is not the majority that Republicans expected to have, 20-plus seats, 30-plus seats.
Now, Rick, Democrats suffered some big and surprising losses here in New York State. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is blaming that on moderate Democrats leaning into Republican narratives on crime, she says. So how do you see this battle between moderates and progressives playing out in the Democratic Party over the next 2 years?
Yeah, there's lots of blame to go around about what happened in New York. The fact that state lawmakers there tried to pass a redistricting plan that the state Supreme Court there found to be unconstitutional, that probably cost a couple of seats as well. And I think what AOC is referring to is some of the decisions around where to run candidates, as well as what kind of messaging to use. They feel like they were caught flat-footed by the crime narrative that Republicans hit. But that happened everywhere. New York was a special case. I do think, though, that look, the Democrats can paper over some of their divisions and some of their issues by the fact that they had a better-than-expected election night, but there's still going to be a battle in terms of where House Democratic leadership goes, questions about whether Speaker Pelosi will continue either as House Speaker or as the House Democratic leader. She ducked those questions so far, and the concerns around Joe Biden and his leadership, his readiness to run again, are still there. They don't go away. By the way, Joe Biden turns 80 this weekend.
And Jay, speaking of leadership, House Republicans are set to hold their leadership elections today. So what are you watching for there?
Yeah, and the big story there is Kevin McCarthy's bid to become Speaker of the House, right? Today, he needs to get a simple majority of his Republican colleagues to vote for him. He is very much expected. It's very likely he will get that. That doesn't make him Speaker of the House. It only positions him to become Speaker of the House. And the big caveat is if Republicans take the majority, as they are expected to do, McCarthy still has to survive a vote in January. He needs to get 218 members of his party to vote for him there. Some further right members of the party, like Matt Gaetz, have said they will not vote for McCarthy. Others, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, have said they do support him.
So, Rick, what are you watching for in these leadership elections, and what will they show about the future of the Republican Party?
There are some people that will never vote for Kevin McCarthy. Where do they park their votes? And I'm interested to see, Diane, are there any deals cut with even moderate Democrats that might help McCarthy secure that speakership?
Jay O'Brien, Rick Klein, thank you both. And former Vice President Mike Pence is breaking his silence, condemning former President Trump's actions during the January 6th insurrection. In an exclusive interview with World News Tonight anchor David Muir, Pence also says he's now considering his own run for president. Chief Washington correspondent Jonathan Karl has the latest.
Nearly 2 years after a mob of Donald Trump's supporters attacked the Capitol, disrupting the transfer of power and chanting "Hang Mike Pence," Trump's once loyal vice president is finally telling his story about what happened that day in an exclusive interview with ABC's David Muir.
At any point on that day, on January 6th, this was unfolding, did the president reach out to talk to you, to ask you how you were doing, to check on your safety?
I never heard from the president or the White House that day.
Ahead of the publication of his book, So Help Me God, which is coming out today, Pence is breaking his silence about how Trump and his allies pressured him to overturn the 2020 election.
Did you ever point blank say to the president, I will not do this, I will not intervene, we lost this election?
I did, David, many times.
We know, because we have learned in testimony since, that it's believed that the president was aware that people in that crowd, that some of them might have been armed, and that he then said, we're going to march to the Capitol, and sent them there anyway. He knew you were at the Capitol, that lawmakers were at the Capitol. What do you make of that?
Well, I thought the president's words were reckless, and his actions were reckless. The president's words that day at the rally endangered me and my family and everyone at the Capitol building.
Those words included a Trump tweet at 2:24 p.m. on January 6th, saying Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done.
It was almost immediate. The moment the tweet went out, and you could see the response from rioters on the Hill. They were saying, hang Mike Pence, nothing but a traitor. He deserves to burn with the rest of them.
Well, I had no doubt that it would have the effect it had.
We've all seen that image now of your wife, Karen, pulling the curtain closed in that office. What was she seeing and hearing? What led her to close that curtain?
Well, we could hear the crowds outside the Capitol. And when we began to move, we could hear the crowds inside the Capitol.
Was there fear in that office when Karen closed the curtain and you were watching on that TV what was unfolding?
I must tell you, I felt no fear. I was filled with indignation about what I saw.
Given all that you witnessed in the Capitol on that day, this is a pretty straightforward question, a yes or a no. Do you believe that Donald Trump should ever be president again?
David, I think that's up to the American people. But I think we'll have better choices in the future.
Better choices than Donald Trump.
For me and my family, we will be reflecting about what our role is in that.
Will you run for president in 2024?
Well, we're giving it consideration in our House. Prayerful consideration.
All right, thanks to John Karl for that. And you can watch David Muir's full exclusive interview with former Vice President Mike Pence streaming now on Hulu. Meanwhile, former President Trump is expected to now announce his run for president tonight. The announcement would come as Republicans are reeling from disappointing midterms, and many are blaming Trump. ABC's Alex Perche joins me live now for more on that. Alex, Trump has been hinting at this announcement for months now. So what's at stake both for Trump and for the Republican Party?
Well, I think for the former president, a lot is at stake, right? I mean, this is going to be a test of his grasp on the Republican Party. And certainly, you mentioned the midterm elections, which a lot of Republicans have blamed on former Trump. Well, that's because former President Trump. But that's because he endorsed so many candidates, dozens and dozens of candidates who have now since lost across the country in sort of a rebuke of sorts. So this is definitely going to be a test of his party or his leadership for the party. But I think for Republicans in general, I mean, they're going to have to decide, okay, well, now you have the former president who is now running again. You have a former vice president who believes that there are better options out there, and potentially Governor DeSantis in Florida, who has also been looked at as a potential presidential candidate. And so, you know, that's going to be something that party is going to have to figure out. I mean, what's their path forward for leadership?
Now, at least 30 Trump-endorsed candidates lost their races last week. What are Republicans in Washington saying about Trump potentially running again?
Well, I think there was an expectation all along that the former president was going to declare at some point. It was just a matter of when. But we have seen some pushback about this announcement that we're expecting tonight. Some folks saying here in Washington that they believe that the president should at least wait until after the Georgia Senate runoff is complete. But again, the former president, it appears to be, as John Carl and some of my other colleagues have reported, it's all systems go for tonight.
All right, Alex Perchet, thank you for that. And Iran has handed down its first death sentence to an anti-government protester. The country has imposed a brutal crackdown on demonstrations after the death of Mahsa Amini, who was arrested for not wearing her hijab correctly. The UN says more than 14,000 people have been arrested since protests broke out 2 months ago. Human rights groups say at least 20 people are now facing charges punishable by death. Coming up, new details after a gunman killed 3 football players at the University of Virginia. What we're learning when we come back. Welcome back. Classes are canceled at UVA as the suspect in the deadly mass shooting awaits his arraignment. 3 UVA football players are dead, and police say the shooter is a student and former football player himself. Faith Abube is there.
A community coming together following the deadly shooting at the University of Virginia that killed 3 students as officials are on the hunt for a motive.
We just received information the suspect is in custody. Just need a moment to thank God. Breathe a sigh of relief.
A 12-hour manhunt ending after police say Christopher Darnell Jones Jr. fatally shot fellow students and football players Deshaun Perry, Devin Chandler, and Lavelle Davis Jr. following a class trip. The suspect also previously on the team but never played. The police chief revealed Jones was already on the radar of school officials, saying the university's threat assessment team learned about Jones in September after someone said he had boasted about having a gun. The chief also said Jones was involved in a previous hazing investigation. He's now facing 3 counts of second-degree murder and 3 counts of using a handgun in commission of a felony. The players were shot on this bus Sunday night.
I have 2 people shot. One person's at the UVA box office. Lay down. And one person's at the Colbert garage, shot in the chest.
It's unclear why Jones allegedly opened fire on the bus.
I don't know what to say right now. I just want to say there was 3 young, great men who are on the way to become great.
Mike Collins says his son was shot in the back, but survived. He'll undergo surgery later on this morning.
As a parent, you try to protect your kids, but some things you have no control over.
And we're also hearing from the family of one of the deceased victims for the first time overnight. Devin's family told ABC News, quote, as anyone could possibly imagine, this unspeakable tragedy has left the Chandler family devastated. Diane?
All right, Faith Abube, thank you. Coming up, why beautiful fields of peat may one day save the world and the billionaires trying to own as much of it as they can. Welcome back. The UN's climate conference is now in its 2nd week, where world leaders debate climate change policies for the future. But over in Scotland, there's an innovative solution to help slow global warming. Maggie Rulli traveled to the Scottish Highlands to find out more.
Nestled in the base of these misty mountains lies a priceless natural resource that's been trapping carbon for thousands of years: peat. And today, this wet, thick mud made up of centuries-old plants is the latest hot ticket for climate investors.
The peat we're walking on right now has the potential to make millions. It's the new green rush, with companies and billionaires coming in buying up tens of thousands of acres of this land up here in rural Scotland, restoring it and cashing in on carbon credits.
Craft beer company Brewdog is betting on bogs.
If there's a world where nobody lives, then no one's drinking beer in that world, and that's not so good.
Co-founder Martin Dickey takes us into what they've named the Lost Forest, showing us the nearly 10,000 acres of land they bought in northeastern Scotland in 2020.
It's not about your carbon today, it's about your carbon in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time. So it's a long-term, it's a generational play.
Brewdog's first brewery started just a couple hours east of here. They now ship to 55 countries. Restoring this land will help them offset the carbon their company creates, as they also work to reduce the carbon they create in the first place. But for Martin, he says it's about more than carbon credits. He grew up around here.
You don't inherit the land from your ancestors, you're actually looking after it for your children. As business owners, we felt we had the responsibility to start working hard and understanding our emissions from our business, but also doing what we can to help, rewild a little bit of Scotland and do some peat restoration work as well.
He and his team are now working with experts to rewild this land, planting native trees and letting nature take back control, making it look like it did hundreds of years ago, including vast areas of peat bogs.
The idea of peat restoration is to make sure that peat bogs stay wet. You can see these black lines are where they've been able to dam up irrigation ditches, and that lets all of the water pool here below, creating a healthy peat bog. And this is eventually what they want the entire area here to become.
Because when peat is healthy, it's an environmental powerhouse like none other on Earth. The Amazon is often called the lungs of the planet, but peat traps more carbon than a tropical rainforest, meaning the UK could be sitting on a massive, untapped resource.
This is the largest blanket peat bog in Europe and one of the largest carbon sinks in the world, because nothing else in nature stores carbon quite like peat. It makes up 3% of the Earth's surface, but holds 30% of its carbon. And 15% of the world's peat is found right here in Scotland, meaning this land could play a major role in trapping carbon and fighting climate change.
But peat grows just 1 millimeter a year, about the size of a fingernail. And right now, 80% of it in the UK is damaged.
In good condition, if it's naturally covered, it is one of the best ecosystems in the world for storing carbon. As soon as the soil is exposed to the atmosphere, it starts emitting carbon instead of saving carbon.
Claudia Rouse has worked with the government-backed organization Nature Scot for 20 years. She tells us decades of intensive agriculture, poor irrigation, and a warming planet have turned the country's peat bogs from carbon sinks into carbon sources.
It is so simple. We know how to repair it. Basically, you get a digger and you recover it over.
And the Scottish government has taken notice. The country has some of the most ambitious climate legislation in the world, pledging to become net zero by 2045.
The first milestone we've got to hit is by 2030, we have got to reduce Scotland's emissions by 75%. One of the ways we can do it in the most cost-effective way is through restoring our peatlands.
But Claudia says the government can't do it on their own.
They have earmarked £250 million over the next 10 years to pump prime the start of this peatland restoration. In order to restore all of the peatland in Scotland, which is 1.8 million hectares, 1.8 million soccer fields in other language, we estimate you need several billion pounds of investment. So we're really looking at how the carbon market can help to attract this private investment into Scotland.
Scotland's now become a testing ground for this new global carbon market. Through the government-backed Peatland Action Program, landowners are reimbursed for a portion of their expenses restoring the land. This restored land can then be verified through the UK's Peatland Code to create a carbon credit, which can then be sold to any company looking to offset carbon emissions. But some in Scotland fear this new carbon economy will only benefit foreign elites, leaving local Scots behind.
This has a risk of furthering the inequalities that we already see.
Magnus Davidson's a researcher at the University of the Highlands and Islands in Scotland. He calls today's climate investors green lairds and says it brings back bitter memories of the Scottish clearances starting in the late 1700s, when rich landowners forcibly removed vast amounts of people living on their land to make room for sheep.
What's happened in the clearances continues through to this day with this economic lever that the landowners really have over the landscape.
Today, it's not sheep, it's rising rents that are threatening people's homes.
Land prices are just spiraling out of control because there's so much interest in investment in this land for green purposes.
The amount of money invested in Scottish land doubled last year, climbing to $330 million, with the average price of estate sold in 2021 increasing by 87%.
A just transition is around moving to net zero or a more biodiverse world in a socially just way.
Walking through the lost forest with Martin, he says to just look around, that this nature is bigger than any of us.
All this is going to outlive everyone, so the best thing we can do is kind of put some resource back into it and try and rewild it, and then allow the next generations of scouts and guides and kids to come up here.
And that businesses have a responsibility to step up.
We can't wait another generation and push it down the line and hope that someone else will sort it. So the more people willing to share their experiences, the better everyone can make better decisions in the future and do the things that work and don't do the things that don't work.
A renewed push in this beautiful corner of the planet to preserve nature and our place in it before it's too late.
It's almost as if who knows what's perfect, but at least you're doing something.
At least you're trying, yeah. I think the worst thing you can do is just sit and wait for either for someone else to do the hard work for you or deny it in the first place.
Beautiful and interesting. Maggie, really thank you. And I'm Diane Macedo. Thank you for joining us. And stay with us as ABC News Live continues with more news, context, and analysis.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.